Luigi Mangione is in federal, not state custody tonight, facing fresh and largely unexpected charges on top of the first and second degree state murder counts, among others. A New York grand jury has indicted him on. Perspective now from CNN senior legal analyst Elie Honig, also defense attorney Danya Perry. Like Elie, she's a former federal prosecutor. We should also note that Karen Friedman Agnifilo, the suspect's attorney, used to be affiliated with her law firm. CNN's John Miller joins us too, as does New York City Judge George Grasso. Good to have you all on. John, I want to begin with you because you're learning new details about this tug of war, to some degree, between federal and state prosecutors.
Well, that's right. And what we've been following today, and really since last night, is kind of a tug of war between the United States Attorney, the federal prosecutor in Manhattan, the place where Elie Honig used to work, and the Manhattan District Attorney. So this morning, they were set up with barricades in front of 100 Center Street, the state courthouse. The judge was up on the 13th floor arranging where a camera would be to shoot the arraignment. There was a special arrangement made to book the prisoner in the district attorney's office. And by mid-morning, they found out he wasn't coming to be arraigned in state court by the district attorney on an indictment of felony murder charges, including murder in the first degree. Instead, he was taken into custody by the NYPD, handed over to the FBI, and he was going to federal court. And this was hastily arranged, caused a lot of confusion. But what you're not seeing, and this is important to note, is, and we've kind of seen this before in other cases, any kind of battle between the FBI and the NYPD on who gets the arrest.
Right.
What you're seeing is federal prosecutors going for a jump ball on this case. The federal prosecutors using kind of a unique charge to go after a murder, which is usually a state charge. And interestingly, the state prosecutors using what is usually a federal charge, terrorism.
Yeah, notable. Okay, Danya, you're a criminal defense attorney as well as a former federal prosecutor. It struck me, as Shimon noted there, that we heard something of a potential line of argument from Mangione's defense attorney, noting the differences between these two cases, the New York State charges with a terrorism enhancement for causing fear or attempting to strike fear among the population, and the federal one had a stalking element to that. I wonder, as a defense attorney, do you see an opening there for the defense to say, hey, these two are somehow conflicting?
I'd like to say that I do as a defense attorney and as a former colleague and friend of Karen Agnifilo's, but there's no tension really to exploit at all. The federal and the state charges can be largely overlapping. They could really actually be the same because they're two different sovereigns. They could be wildly different, and there's no basis, there's no defense or legal argument that I could think of. So analytically, it's kind of interesting, and that's true. And what was just said is also true, that typically the terrorism charge is a federal one and stalking is a state one. It's all, a little muddled right now. As you said, I think I was doing a podcast with Karen by mid-morning. She still thought she was going to arraignment in state court. And so there's a lot up in the air and a lot of unknowns. But I think that one was just almost more comparing and contrasting the two charging instruments and saying, that's interesting, but of no moment legally.
Elie, some have raised questions about the risk, given the enormous and somewhat shocking outpouring of support for Mangione in the wake of this horrible cold-blooded murder, concern about jury nullification in this, in which case a jury might say, yeah, the evidence points towards conviction, but we're still not going to convict him. What is your level of concern about that as a possibility?
Well, Jim, I was always worried about jury nullification, even in the most routine cases I handled as a prosecutor. All it takes is one juror and you have a hung jury. So it's always the kind of thing that keeps prosecutors up at night. And yes, the risk here absolutely is elevated. I've never seen an outpouring of affection and support for a defendant charged with a vicious murder like we have in this case. However, I want to say a couple things. One, the jury selection process is really effective, not perfect, but really effective at weeding out people who were biased. We saw it in the Trump trial. We saw half of the jury just got up and walked out because they felt they were too biased. The other thing is, it's one thing to pop off on social media, to post a meme or something. It's another thing to sit through weeks of evidence about someone who shot someone in the back, to get a jury instruction from a judge like Judge Grasso, who tells you your job is to apply the law and then to nullify. So yes, you have to be aware of it, but there are important systemic controls here against it.
Yeah, and listen, every time that video comes up, as we just showed it there, it's and the planning that went into it, and what we're learning about his manifesto saying, right, this will tick a lot of boxes, and to whack an insurance executive. I mean, it speaks to planning. I wonder, George Grasso, I want to play a clip of something that Karen Friedman Agnifilo said on this program last week about Mangioni's possible defense, another potential line of defense. I should note this was before she was announced as his attorney. Have a listen.
The evidence is going to be so overwhelming that he did what he did. And I hear what you're saying about being radicalized. I hear what you guys are saying. But as a former prosecutor in that office, I would be concerned that you have someone who is a valedictorian of his class. He was brilliant his whole life. He comes from this great family. I mean, something changed, right? Significantly, something changed. And they're going to, I think, potentially have a not guilty by reason of insanity potential defense.
She's now a lawyer. George Grasso, do you see that as a potential line of defense?
Well, I know Karen well and I respect her, but frankly, I don't see it here. And the reason I don't see it is because there's so much publicly available information. Like, for example, I read the federal complaint today and a lot of other data. This is a very careful and methodically planned event. Remarkable. And credit to the NYPD is they were able to put in hundreds, if not thousands of hours to make an almost reverse documentary of the actions of this individual. So to show insanity to the level that he would be excused criminally, I think is a long shot. I also think it's really bad news for Luigi Mangione and good news for the rule of law, the action that the federal government took today, because that brings this case to a whole nother level, because the murder charge involves people aren't really talking about that too much, involves the death penalty is not available in the state of New York. And it also involves a methodology of, using the stalking laws to weave in murder, I think is pretty much right down the middle of the plate based on the evidence as we have now. On the other hand, Alvin Bragg, who will have to take a back seat here. He can talk all he wants and give press conferences that they're going to move on parallel tracks. They're not going to move on parallel tracks. The federal government is going to dictate the pace. And Bragg, I think he made the right move, using terrorism to get to murder one, but that's kind of untested at this level. And if he got a conviction, would certainly go to the Court of Appeals. So for a lot of reasons, it makes perfect sense for the rule of law, for the federal government to go first, use all their leverage that they have with this being a death penalty case. Bragg takes a back seat. We see what happens there. And ultimately, we have justice. And anyone who thinks Mangione is a hero really needs a psychiatrist. I can't find anything heroic in stalking a man and shooting him in the back.
A father or two, right, as well. So it's just remarkable to see that so common. Danya, did you see it playing out similarly here, that the feds have the upper hand now?
Yeah, and I think Ellie would probably agree with me, having seen so many of these turf wars. The feds, I agree with the judge, the feds usually win that tug of war. We saw both acting U.S. Attorney Edward Kim and District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who grew up together at the U.S. Attorney's office, actually speaking very nicely, as colleagues, but about we're going to run in parallel tracks. But in practice and in reality, that is not going to be the case. I do agree that the feds will surely go first, even though at first blush you would think these seem more suited to state charges. But when that's bumped up to first-degree murder, I agree as well with the judge, I guess, on everything, that makes it a lot harder and therefore easier for the feds to go first.
One thing I would say, Jim, is at the statement that they issued from the U.S. Attorney today, they said that the current plan, so they left it qualified, that the state case, the DA's case, would go first. But that leaves them a lot of room to negotiate for pleas in both cases and to package them together.